ما شفنا شيء.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. Saudi Arabia's King Salman names his interior minister as heir in a generational shift that also sees one of his sons promoted to second in line to the throne. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri wraps up his official visit to Washington with a meeting with the American Arab Chamber of Commerce, stressing the business community is a hope for Lebanon. And Interior Minister Nuhad al-Mashnout tours Beirut's southern suburbs in the light of the security deployment in the area after a security plan kicks off. Saudi Arabia's King Salman named his interior minister as his heir in a generational shift that also sees one of his sons promoted to second in the throne. A royal decree removed Crown Prince Mukrin bin Abdulaziz bin Saud, who is 69 years old, as heir and replaced him with Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, who is 55 years old, who led a crackdown on Al-Qaeda in the kingdom a decade ago. Riyadh also changed its foreign minister in the second major government shakeup since King Salman inherited power in January. The announcement comes a day after Saudi Arabia said it arrested 93 jihadists since the end of 2014, most of them linked to the Islamic State group, and foiled several plots to carry out attacks across the kingdom, accentuating the move to a more youthful leadership. Salman is 79. He also promoted one of his sons, Mohammed bin Salman, to be Deputy Crown Prince. Mohammed bin Salman, in his early 30s, retains his position of Defense Minister, in which he oversees more than a month of airstrikes against Yemen. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri wrapped up his Washington visit with a meeting at the American Arab Chamber of Commerce, stressing that the business community is a hope for all the country. Stability is necessary, he said, for growth and to move the economic wheel in any country. He told a meeting what Lebanon is going through now poses the biggest challenge, but he will be able to overcome the crisis. He said this while underlining the importance of the role that could be played by the Lebanese diaspora in helping the economy. A statement from his office said the meeting focused on the economic situation in the region and ways to promote and strengthen trade and economic exchange between Lebanon and the U.S. Earlier on Tuesday, he held separate meetings with U.S. senators and Steve Dane, attending in honor a lunch at the Council of Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East in Washington. Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnout is touring Beirut's southern suburbs in a new effort to up security deployments in the area after a security plan kicked off. Security is restored in several areas across Lebanon despite the conflict in the region, Mashnout said in a press conference from Al-Uza'i area. He stressed that security forces will not cease their campaign until a list of outlaws are detained, pointing out that forces will continue to pursue offenders even if the implementation of the plan. Indeed, Mashnout considered that the security plans enforced by the security agencies and the political dialogue between the rival parties aim at safeguarding the country. The Lebanese have chosen to stand by the state, the minister said, adding that areas are under the state control. He was also expected to visit the headquarters of Hezbollah's loyalty to the resistance bloc in Dahi. Speaker Nabih Berri is praising the implementation of a security plan in Beirut and its southern suburbs in Dahi. He said, "We laud the plan and role of the security agencies in cracking down on terrorist cells." He made his remarks during the weekly meeting with lawmakers at his Ain Atini residence. Moreover, the speaker called for fortifying Lebanon's internal scene through dialogue in order to confront the impact of regional consequences on Tuesday. The army and internal security forces took into force a security plan in Beirut and its southern suburbs to apprehend outlaws. The plan will last several days as security forces strike with an iron fist to arrest offenders. Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja is calling on Lebanese businessmen to safeguard the interest of the expats abroad, expressing concern over the campaign targeting Saudi Arabia and its repercussions. Following a meeting with a delegation from Lebanon Business and Investment Council in Saudi Arabia, Jaja stressed that endeavors are ongoing and any harm targeting Lebanese businessmen in any way The gathering discussed the challenges facing expats in the Gulf due to a campaign of falsifications, particularly targeting Saudi Arabia. The leader conveniently said the concerns of the businessmen over the interest, expressing relief over the kingdom's positive role in Lebanon. Coming up next, in a camp for quake survivors near Kathmandu, residents say children are lacking access to sufficient food and shelter. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Future Television in English. Jets from a Saudi-led alliance destroyed the runway of Yemen's Sana'a airport to prevent an Iranian plane from landing there. Saudi Arabia is saying that fighting across the country has killed at least 30 people. An official at the Yemeni Civil Aviation Authority said the runway was targeted by 20 sorties that destroyed both the takeoff and landing runways. The footage broadcasted by the Houthis, Al Masira television, showed planes being hit on a runway, smoke rising from the aircraft, but also completely destroyed planes with burned cockpits. The director of the airport, Khalid Al-Shayef, was standing in front of the TV camera while the sound of explosions could be heard in the distance, telling the camera crew to film what has been happening at the airport. In a temporary camp for quake survivors near Kathmandu's Tribhuvan airport, residents say children are lacking access to sufficient shelter, medicine, and food. Displaced residents continue to camp in makeshift tents throughout the country 5 days after the 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit. In this camp in Kathmandu, an extended family of 20, including 10 children, were living alone in one tent. The camp is currently home to 200 survivors of the country's worst earthquake in more than 80 years. Anger and frustration have been mounting steadily in Nepal, with the government yet to fully assess the devastation wrought. International aid has begun arriving, but disbursement has been slow, partly because aftershocks have sporadically closed the airport. Nearly 1 million children have been severely affected. A spokesman for the United Nations Children Fund, known as UNICEF, said this is while rescue and aid workers struggle to cope. Iran says a Marshall Islands flag cargo ship was ordered to dock in the Gulf port of Bandar Abbas because of a commercial dispute. U.S. defense officials say at least 5 Iranian ships demanded that the Maersk Tigris head toward Iran's Larak Island while it was in the Strait of Hormuz.
We are aware of reports that a commercial cargo ship, the MV Maersk Tigris, which is Marshall Islands flagged, as you said, Arshad, a container vessel, was intercepted by several Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy patrol craft this morning while it was transiting the Strait of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf on an internationally recognized maritime route. The IRGC Navy contacted the vessel, and they directed the master of the vessel to divert further into Iranian waters. And the master initially declined, and one of the patrol craft, the IRGC Navy patrol craft, fired shots across the Maersk Tigris's bow. The master then complied and diverted under escort of the IRGC Navy vessels toward Iranian waters. At about the same time, the vessel issued a distress call, which was received by U.S. forces. Our Navy forces are monitoring the situation with the Maersk Tigris. We're in communication with representatives of the shipping company, and we're monitoring the situation. I'd also like to point out, because there have been a number of questions about whether American citizens were on board. According to information that we have received from the vessel's operators, there are no American citizens on board. We're working to confirm that. It is. Well, it's a key concern of the United States to ensure that sea lanes in the region remain open and safe. You'll all recall that the U.S. Recently deployed a carrier as well as other vessels into the Arabian Sea and into the region. We operate in the region as a core mission of the U.S. Navy to ensure the freedom of navigation, and we remain committed to our regional partners and to maintaining security in the maritime environment. I think the President also spoke to this last week, so certainly the freedom of navigation and safe and secure shipping is very important to us.
Demonstrators and police clashed briefly in a second night of protest in the U.S. city of Baltimore, where a curfew has been imposed to quell rioting triggered by the death of a black man in police custody. Thousands of police and National Guard troops fanned out to enforce a new curfew and to prevent further violence as the residents are recovering after a night of rioting, looting, and fires. Shops were looted, buildings burned to the ground, 20 officers injured, and police arrested more than 250 in the violence that erupted following Monday's funeral of a 25-year-old black man who died in a hospital a week after suffering a spinal injury in police custody. The death of Freddie Gray gave new energy to the public outcry that flared last year after police killings of unarmed black men in Ferguson, Missouri, New York City, and elsewhere. U.S. President Barack Obama says that he and visiting Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe agreed their nations would work together to bring a quick, successful conclusion to negotiations over a 12-member Pacific Trade Agreement.
With respect to trade, we reviewed the progress our teams have made towards the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I know that the politics around trade can be hard in both our countries, but I know that Prime Minister Abe, like me, is deeply committed to getting this done, and I'm confident we will. I often point out, for example, there are many Japanese cars in America. I want to see more American cars in Japan as well. TPP will help level the playing field. It will be good for the workers of both our countries, and moreover, TPP will have strong protections for workers in the environment and help us set high standards for trade in the 21st century. Based on the progress we've made, Prime Minister Abe and I discussed how the United States and Japan, as the two largest economies in the TPP negotiations, will now work together to lead our TPP partners to swift and successful conclusions of the broader negotiations.
The remains of Australian drug convicts Andrew Chan and Muran Sukumaran have arrived in mortuary in Indonesia's capital of Jakarta. The bodies were picked up from the prison island of Nusa Kambangan after the two men were executed just after midnight. Sukumaran and Chan were arrested in 2005 and sentenced to death the following year for attempting to smuggle 8 kilograms of heroin from Indonesia to Australia. They are among a group of 8 convicts, including 7 foreigners, executed by firing squad. Other than the 2 Australians, 4 Nigerians, a Brazilian, and an Indonesian were also executed by firing squad in a forest clearing near the prison as family members held a candlelit vigil within earshot of the firing range. Following the execution of the 2 men, Australia recalled its ambassador to Jakarta. Australia has deep commercial and political ties with its big neighbor, but said the executions would not impact trade relations. Indonesia defended the executions of the convicts, saying the killings were necessary to fight the country's war against drugs. But the UN Human Rights Agency denounced Indonesia's incomprehensible refusal to respond appeals for clemency. On that note, we end our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Saudi Arabia's King Salman names his interior minister as heir in a generational shift that also sees one of his sons promoted to second in line to the throne. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri wraps up his visit to Washington with a meeting at the Arab-American Chamber of Commerce, stressing the business community is a hope for Lebanon. And Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnout tours Beirut's southern suburbs in light of the security deployment in the area. Those are your headlines for this Wednesday. Join us again tomorrow for the latest. Until then, have a good one.
ما شفني شيء.